going on, everyone? So we all really want to see the Toronto Raptors deal, right? I mean, that seems to be kind of the consensus going around. I personally would love to see it. You get a 3-and-D style point guard that I think would fit beautifully next to LeBron James. You get Gary Trent, a guy that can score at all three levels, true sizable shooting guard that could really help this team. You basically have your front court and your back court locked up for the foreseeable future, which would be nice as well, right? You got your starting five. Now it's just rounding out the bench, although these guys would also help in that regards. Problem is that I think Gary Trent may be a real possibility, but Fred VanVleet is where it becomes an issue because we have so much competition, and the problem with the Lakers is that they don't have a lot of assets in order to go get and compete with other offers, right? You hear Orlando, Minnesota, you hear, the Clippers, all of these teams really want Fred VanVleet to add to their roster, and all of these teams can essentially outbid us. And are the Lakers willing to push their chips and go all in and give the best deal for a Fred VanVleet and a Gary Trent Jr.? So my thinking is, like, instead of trying to get Fred VanVleet and trying to compete with all these other offers, focus in on Gary Trent, get that locked up, and go look at another deal. Whether it's the Toronto deal, the Hornets deal, whatever type of deal, but try to get something else done and then get Gary Trent in the process. So basically, why all the Lions are feeding on this gazelle over here, you're focused on this one over here, and you got the full course, right? You got the better player and the better option long term. That's what I'd really like them to see. But one of the things that came to my mind when I got the reports this morning that the Minnesota Timberwolves are interested in Fred VanVleet and that they would like to make a trade for him. Here's the thing. DeAngelo Russell doesn't make a lot of sense for the Toronto Raptors. He's expiring. Not just that. Would they want DeAngelo Russell, or would they be willing to maybe make a deal elsewhere and work out some type of 3-team deal? If you have the Toronto Raptors willing to take on Russ and both firsts for Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent, would they be willing to take on Russ and both first and send Gary Trent to the Lakers, Fred VanVleet to the Minnesota Timberwolves, and then the Lakers, they could land DeAngelo Russell? I think that could be a nice alternative that could work for all parties, right? Because again, if Toronto is willing to take both first as well as Russell Westbrook for these two, then what's the difference if the Lakers got D'Lo as opposed to Fred VanVleet? And they may be able to get more in the deal from Minnesota. Like maybe Minnesota sends a couple assets, a couple picks, second rounds or something. So they might actually get more in that type of deal rather than otherwise. So this is basically how it would break down. So you'd have the Lakers getting DeAngelo Russell and Gary Trent Jr. You'd have the Toronto Raptors would get Russell Westbrook as well as both firsts. And then, like I said, maybe Toronto would be willing to give up some other assets. I don't think they'd give up I don't even know if they have a first after the Gobert trade, but maybe they're willing to give up a couple seconds or something, right? And then that just adds more value to that deal. And then Minnesota would get Fred VanVleet, and we'd give them Patrick Beverley. There's been tons of reports that Patrick Beverley is interested in returning to Minnesota. So I think that this would be a really nice structured deal. Again, Toronto's side is really easy, really upfront. You get Russell Westbrook, both first from the Lakers, and maybe Minnesota would throw in a couple assets to make things more enticing, as opposed to, losing Fred VanVleet for the long term. Not just that, Minnesota's going to lock up Fred VanVleet to probably the max for the next several years. So they don't really care. Like they're trying to build a contention team, and the Lakers get D'Lo and Gary Trent, which would be huge, right? So from the Fred VanVleet Minnesota side, they get their 3-and-D style point guard that is probably going to be a better natural fit, right? You can allow Anthony Edwards to just be the slashing guard that they need and that he is, right? And then you have Fred VanVleet, who just becomes basically a 3-and-D shooter that, Karl Anthony Towns or Rudy Gobert or Anthony Edwards or whomever can just kick it out to, and then he can knock down the ball. He's a guy that doesn't really need the ball in his hands heavily, right? So he can kind of orchestrate and kind of be the facilitator to kind of hopefully put this all together, right? Be the pass first point guard that I can play some solid defense, knock down the 3 ball, and let me make sure everyone eats. Let me make sure Rudy gets his. Let me make sure Towns gets his, right? And maybe a better natural fit, and they get a guy that they can rely on for the foreseeable future, which very likely they're either going to trade D'Lo at the deadline or they're going to let him go. All reports say that, the D'Lo Timberwolves relationship is basically done. D'Lo has made all kinds of tweets and stuff, basically condemning Minnesota. So I could see that happening. And then they also get Patrick Beverley, right? And Patrick Beverley was great for them. They loved Patrick Beverley, but, they wanted Rudy Gobert, which is understandable. And we've gotten countless reports that Patrick Beverley would love to go back to Minnesota. So Beverley gets what he wants. They get what they want. We get to pick up DeAngelo Russell and Gary Trent, which I'll dive into for the Lakers. And also we'd have Lonnie Walker still, who maybe we could take him in a piece and go get maybe get like a Cam Reddish, right? Or maybe you work something out, maybe him, and because you probably maybe need to unload a couple guys, although you're doing a 2-for-2 swap here, so it's not a big deal. But maybe you unload some other guys and try to get another piece, so that way you have a couple spots open for like the buyout market, right? The Lakers would really love the buyout market. But again, Minnesota, they get Patrick Beverley, who could be that veteran, could be that 3-and-D shooter for them. This would be just really nice for them. Patrick Beverley would love to go back to Minnesota. And now, because Minnesota traded him to the Utah Jazz, and then Jazz sent him to the Lakers, now since the Jazz wasn't the last place he went to, now he can go back to Minnesota and they could work something like that out. Or, you could fit other pieces, right? You could do Walker and it doesn't have to be Patrick Beverley to make it work. So you could actually take out Patrick Beverley entirely and you'd only need to clear about, about 150,000 with the 125% rule. But I think the Lakers would want to try to match as close as possible, which is why Patrick Beverley makes sense. They get what they want. All is right in the world. Otherwise, you could just throw in like a Walker and the deal still works, right? So let's say they're like, hey, we don't want Patrick Beverley. Hey, we understand Patrick Beverley's here, but we don't want Fred VanVleet and Patrick Beverley. It doesn't make any sense. Well, maybe they would take a Walker or maybe Damian Jones and, Troy Brown or something. You can make it work. It doesn't have to be Patrick Beverley. I just wanted to include Patrick Beverley because I think, one, from all accounts we've heard, Minnesota would love Patrick Beverley back. Patrick Beverley would love to go back to Minnesota. So if you can make it work and you could get Gary Trent and DeAngelo Russell, I think that's fine. I think that's great. You can actually make an argument that these two might be better than Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent. Also, D'Lo is younger, so these two guys could be your pieces for the foreseeable future. There's all of the questions that D'Lo had last time he was a Laker are all gone. All of the players that were there at the time of the D'Lo Nick Young incident, they're all gone. So you don't have to worry about that stigma that D'Lo had. He's a guy that we've seen can play make, he can score, he can shoot the three. Minnesota has an incredible record when D'Lo scores 20 plus points a game. They're almost unbeatable when D'Lo scores 20 plus per game, right? But you'd have D'Lo, a sizable point guard. You'd have Gary Trent, a sizable 3-and-D shooting guard. And then you'd have Rui, you'd have LeBron, you'd have AD. Right? So you basically got two guys that can score at all three levels. You got two guys that can hit clutch shots, right? D'Lo, Mr. Ice in his veins, right? He's been known for that. He's a guy that isn't afraid of the moment. One of the big things we need is shooting and closing and defense and stuff. D'Lo's not the greatest defender, but Gary Trent can be. And you'd have these two, you'd have Rui, you'd have LeBron and AD. I think that might actually be better than Fred VanVleet, honestly. Not just that, but D'Lo's not going to be a $31 million guy again, right? So you probably can re-sign D'Lo for maybe $20 million, if not less, right? You're giving him maybe $18 million a year. You're going to re-sign Gary Trent to 23, 24, 25 million, somewhere in that ball range. But essentially if you could get both of these guys for, let's call it $40 million a year, that's a home run. Right? That would be great. And, Fred VanVleet wants a max. And here's the thing. I'm not saying D'Lo doesn't want a max, but who's going to give it to him? Right? Most of the teams that have cap space, they're young rebuilding teams that a lot of them already have point guards or have shooting guards or things like that. Any contending team already has most of them have their point guard or shooting guard locked up, and they don't have max money, and the Lakers would have his bird rights. So it's if you can find more than $20 million, go take it. I don't think he would. Lakers could get him for cheaper than what Fred VanVleet would cost, which is a big concern, right? That's something that the Lakers have concerns with, paying a bunch of money for guys. And he's 28, injury history, all that stuff. Not that D'Lo doesn't have his little things, but D'Lo still, I think D'Lo gives you more versatility. A guy that can play on the ball, can play off the ball, can shoot the three, but he can play make if you need him to. He could go. He's a guy that on a nightly basis could go get you 20 if you need him to. Same thing with Gary Trent. Last year, Gary Trent was like second and third in the league in 30-point games. So you got two guys that can just explode offensively if you need them to. You got two guys that can play make. You got a guy in Gary Trent who can defend. Yes, D'Lo isn't a great defender, but he's bigger than Fred VanVleet. And it's not like Fred VanVleet is a lockdown defensive guard. Like, no, he's serviceable, but he's not like some great defensive guard. So I don't think you're losing much defensively there. You're bigger, right? You have basically 2 6'5" guys in the front. You got a 6'8" guy in Rui Hachimura with the 7'2" wingspan. You got Anthony Davis, 6'11". You got LeBron James, 6'8", 6'9" with the 7-foot wingspan. You got 3 guys in your front court, all with the 7+ wingspan, and you got 2 guys in the front that all have length. You're going to be very disruptive defensively. Good team defense. You get 2 guys that can shoot the lights out. This might actually be the best deal the Lakers could get, because D'Lo, again, is a guy that can score at all 3 levels, can close out for the Lakers, right? Can be very productive for him. I don't think he's going to cost as much as Fred VanVleet wants. Gary Trent, same thing. Gary Trent is a guy that can score at all 3 levels. He's 24 years old, 23 years old. So he's a guy that is both of these guys could be with the Lakers for the next 7 years, right? Like, that's perfect. And then on par with like Rui Hachimura. And then even when AD leaves, you're just like, here you go, boom. Like, everyone's happy. Even when LeBron leaves, you still got D'Lo, you still got Gary Trent, you still got Anthony Davis, you still got Rui Hachimura. So you still got enough to potentially contend or be a really good team. Maybe you just go find that other star or something like that. But you're probably good. Maybe Gary Trent evolves into that. Or maybe Rui Hachimura becomes, takes the next step and becomes this, 3-and-D style type player, right? I mean, there's concerns of that, but still, I mean, D'Lo's 26, so it's like, again, you have him for the next 6-7 years. And, I really like this as an idea, as an alternative. Again, this is just my own personal thought that when I saw the Timberwolves wanted him, I was like, how can we turn this into something? Is there a way for us to do that? And I was like, oh man, like what if we let them get Gary Trent, what if we let them get Fred VanVleet? We take Gary Trent, we take D'Lo, and then everyone's happy. It's a win-win for all sides. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion, so I pass the question on to you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? Do you love this deal? Do you like this deal better than Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent? Do you think no? I'd rather have Fred VanVleet. My thing is D'Lo's the better player, without a doubt. He's just the fourth clunky option on the Timberwolves. And again, I recommend go look up Minnesota's record when D'Lo puts up 20+ points. They are really good. Really, they are very hard to beat. It's just Minnesota doesn't really seem to like D'Lo or want D'Lo or whatever the relationship, whatever's going on there. But I would love to have D'Lo, right? I mean, you can make an argument they should have kept D'Lo over Lonzo Ball. But I understand with the Nick Young incident and all that stuff. But regardless, however you feel, whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it down in the comment section below.